I'm going to introduce myself, but not in the way that you've normally experienced, but I'm going to do that shortly. I just want to tell you a little story, first of all. Years ago, mid-90s, I worked at the Guardian newspaper, and there was a manager there, a very, very good leader. He wasn't a manager, he was a leader. He was one of the best leaders I've ever seen. And there was something about him that really got under my skin. I had a visceral response to him. I didn't like him at some level, and yet he was really pleasant, he was personable, he was intelligent, he was good at his job. And I then clicked what it was. He had a particular accent. He had a male public school English accent. And I had a particularly strong reaction to that accent. And I realised at that point that every man I met who had a particularly strong public school English accent, part of me went, "Ugh!" represented something I didn't like. He had a difference that I didn't like. So, just as a setup for what we're going to do. Today, so far, my feeling is that I've been using this more than this and this. For the next hour, my invitation to you is to notice not just this, but also this and this. Because if we're OD practitioners, and if we're dealing with culture, you can't just work with that. In my experience, ain't going to help. So, before we do the introduction, I just want to do a little bit of contracting. So I offer you this. It's an invitation. It's not a command. It's a request. I'd welcome your honesty. Honesty as you talk. Honesty also, if you're starting to fall asleep after lunch, stand up. Go and stick your head out the window like I did 10 minutes ago. Go and get another cup of tea. So be honest with yourself and where your energy is with me and with us. Be respectful. If we're talking about similarities and difference, you may not agree. You may not agree. Can you respect the difference? Listen when it's appropriate. Participate. Some of us don't like being in big groups or small groups. So my invitation, if you don't like being in a group, it would be lovely if you said something, even if it was really short. Okay? Notice your thoughts, and I really encourage you to notice when you feel something that's not a thought. And be kind. And I'm going to say more about that in a moment, why I think that's important. So, now for my introduction, because I haven't done that yet. You don't know who I am. I need... Oh, you're probably wondering what this guy's for? Okay. I'll tell you in a moment. I need 4 volunteers. The rule is this. What I need is 4 people who think they don't know me, either personally or professionally or both. So I need 4 volunteers, people who don't know me. 1, 2, thanks Bernd. And hang on, so who were the first 2 we had? You 2, so we need another man and a woman, so we'll take you 2. Sorry, missed you. Do you want to come as well? We're going to have 5. Let's have 5. So you 5, come on. So, could the 5 of you just go and stand over here, please? Facing this way. Could you play the music now, because the singing starts? Yeah. What was the 5th one? I said we could have 5. Who was the one who didn't want to come? No? Was it you? Do you want to come? You sure? Okay. So. Great. So I'm now going to do my introduction. So I'm just noticing I'm feeling nervous. That's interesting. A bit excited. What I'd like you to do, as I talk, I'd like you to simply move either towards or away from me as you hear me speak, as you see how I use my body language. That's all. My invitation is just, if you feel a move, just do it. If you want to move that thing behind you in case you want to run out the window, then do so. Okay. So the introduction, that's data. So this is who I am. I'm Steve Hearsum. Professionally, I work for Roffey Park, which is an organisational development and leadership institute in the UK. Now, do you know Roffey Park? Who knows Roffey Park? No? Okay, in a nutshell, Roffey Park does development of organisational practitioners. We are leadership development people, and we also run masters and qualifications programs. And most of my work there seems to be, at the moment, dealing with organisations wrestling with the impact of emerging technologies, with culture change, with how on earth do you lead change. Yeah? And I work across different sectors. So that's Roffey. But my background, I'm actually half German and half English. I was delighted to be invited here because I love Germany. So my mother, with her family in 1947, were effectively forced by the end of the Second World War by Russia to move from what was East Germany to the West. So I have family in Marburg am Lahn, where I was over the summer, and I am going to have a Bratwurst before I go home, just to be absolutely clear. I was born in Paris, so I have that. I also have a bit of Corsican blood in me. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was the mayor of Riga, because my family are German, Latvian people. So I feel my cultural difference and my similarity to you very strongly. Okay? My daughter, interestingly, she probably beats all of us, because my wife is of Polish, Jewish, English extraction. So she came to the UK in her descendants came in the 1930s. They were Polish Jewish dairy farmers near Birmingham. And if any of you know Birmingham, that's a really weird mix. Okay? And who I am as a person, I have a lovely daughter, Maya, who had a wonderful school report this week, and I'm actually really emotional about it because the things they said about her were beautiful. My wife, Paula, is a wonderful woman. She married me. She's... and she's been very important to me. So, the other thing that's relevant is I'm also a human systems dynamics practitioner. There's another one of us in the room, Griff, over there, and I'll be referring to human systems dynamics as we go. A couple of other things now. Let's just test this out. So that was me just talking at you, vaguely aware. So let's try this on for size. Politically, I really wanted us to stay in the EU. I really wanted us to stay. I really understand why people voted out. I wanted us to stay in. I live in Brighton, where we have the only Green MP in the UK, and she's actually really good. I am a bit of a coffee nerd, so I don't do instant coffee. It's a devil's spawn. It should not be drunk. Yeah, and that'll probably do. Okay, let's just stop. Anything else you want to know about me before we go on that's useful? No? Probably. You can find out. So what happened here? So you ran away. So if you're willing, what was it that meant you moved away?
It was too much about other people instead of you.
Ah, yeah.
And at the end, it was, you like coffee, but I didn't get the real...
So you want the real me?
Yeah.
So what would the real me be?
Why are you here?
Why am I here? Great question. Why am I here?
Give him a coffee.
Because I actually really like the idea of bringing my personal cultural story into this context with a group of practitioners who are inquiring into difference and similarity. That's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah? So others, you've moved a bit towards me.
Yeah.
Because?
Because you became more personal and you started to relate to who you are and how your context works with you.
Okay. Anybody else move?
You were connecting. You were bringing them in.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Great. So here's the thing. If what you're expecting is a really neatly wrapped box with some answers in, I'm really sorry. What's great is I have the same ringtone. So just for a moment I was going, it's me, okay? Isn't that great? If what you're expecting is something neat, then you're not going to get it. We're going to get a quack ring. Life isn't like that. When it particularly comes to culture, it is not neat. My experience as a practitioner is things are a little bit more like what I'm going to show you. Don't worry about the sound, you don't need it. It's only a minute. Hopefully you can see it. So you probably weren't expecting to see a T-Rex today. But for me, why I love that is because the idea that our clients, and often leaders in the cultural context we have, who crave certainty.
Rex is back,
Oh, Rex is back. Sorry, Rex, you're going. Yeah, he's better value than me. The idea that you can have certainty and things are going to be neat is an illusion. The idea is that practitioners, we can explore something like cultural difference and similarity and difference with it being really neat and without it potentially going wrong, or realizing that the scissors we've got, that tool, that intervention that we hope is going to be perfect, it's not like that. It is inherently messy. So my offer to you for this next 45 minutes now is not neat. I actually don't know what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen in your conversations. And I hope it does get a bit messy, actually. So, this is what I was asked to do. As you can see, I only have 2 slides. Experiencing intervention, just the one. Maybe we'll do another. The testing assumptions in the moment.
Maybe I missed the point. How is the T-Rex?
So for me, it's when we're working with culture, when we as practitioners, as we do outside here but also here today, we talk about culture, the idea that it can be neat. So in our group 4, when I spoke to you earlier on, there was a level of conversation where intellectually we were trying to make things ordered. But you and I had a conversation, there was a lot of other stuff going on underneath that's not neat. And you can't keep it in a box, you can't keep it controlled.
So we were the T-Rex or we were the gift paper, the present wrapping?
For me, it's what the T-Rex is experiencing is what's underneath.
Okay, good.
Is that clearer? That's the way I interpret the metaphor. Yeah? And as a metaphor, it may not work for you. So, I'd encourage you to test your own assumptions as we go. And I noticed that I was asked to look at the differences and similarities between German and Anglo-Saxon OD. But we've already done lots of that. I've actually redesigned my session 4 times in the last hour and a half as I've walked around and noticed what you've talked about. So, this is what we're going to do. This comes from Glenda Oyang. It's an adaptive action cycle. We have a what, a so what, and a now what. So, what are the similarities and differences between German and Anglo-Saxon OD? Now, what I was struck by upstairs was that we were doing the individual fields, but we weren't holding them up to compare to each other. What I'd like to do when I set you off is I would actually like you to compare, for example, Anglo-Saxon and German OD. Compare Italian and American. But it also struck me that we run the risk here of missing some of the other similarities and differences that you may want to bring in. So, for example, what's the differences between male and female OD? if any? I notice we're in a room where there's not a single non-Caucasian face. We're all white, European, pretty much. So what's the difference, if any, between non-white ethnic OD and other forms of OD? I don't know. What's the difference between OD that's delivered by somebody who's under the age of 30, Lentz, may have something to say on that, and those of us who are older than 50, as I now am? What about class?
No one here.
Sorry?
No one here.
No one hears what?
It's older than 50.
You mean, as we learned yesterday, 50 and holding, right?
Yeah. Class. We are all, I would imagine, doing okay economically. I don't get a sense any of us are homeless like some of the people I walked past from the station last night. What's the difference between those who are well off and those who are not when it comes to practice, if there are any implications? Gifford, actually, really interesting, on the ODNE board recently, we worked out that Gifford is the only member of our board who is an internal OD consultant. The rest of us on the board are externals. What's the difference and the similarity between internal and external practitioners? Okay? So I guess I'm giving you a choice, because it feels to me there are similarities and differences everywhere we look. I'm not going to decide for you that the differences between Anglo-Saxon and German OD are the ones that you want to work on now. That feels to me too constraining, but I leave that to you. So, what I'd like you to do for 15 minutes is to self-organise around some similarities and differences. Now, I'm going through in my head how we actually do this. So I'm kind of curious, when I talk about those different similarities and differences, do any of you notice an energy to explore any of them? Because this doesn't work with me just talking about it. If you are practitioners, I'm offering you a space for you to inquire. It's your inquiry, it's not mine. So what do you want to inquire about around similarity and difference?
To me, it's probably younger and older.
So, younger and older. So how are they the same and different? So we have somebody here who wants to do that. What other ones?
Rationality and emotions.
Rationality and emotions, okay. So we have age/generations, rationality and emotions. Yeah.
Problem solving.
Versus,
Problem solving, different approaches.
how are they the same and different? Can you sharpen it?
Problem solving, solution orientation.
Oh, I see. Solution and open-ended.
Okay.
Individualistic and collectivistic.
Yeah. What else? High-powered versus low-powered. High.
The power distance. Do you agree that people have more power to decide?
Okay. Yep.
I'd like to continue a conversation around the implications for virtual working.
So virtual working versus non-virtual working.
And how the different cultures then play out.
So if I put virtual face-to-face.
Yeah.
Okay. John?
Academic certification versus like street learning or something like
Oh, sorry, I've just noticed I'm drawn to that one. That's where my energy's gone. So academic versus... If I just put academic street... So the thing here is, if you're voicing them, I'm assuming you're going to host a conversation.
British humor versus German humor.
Isn't it interesting? So that's the first one. We'll come to that. It's the first one based on the German and Anglo-Saxon.
I tried it.
Yeah. Well, in terms of here, what I was asked to do initially when I was invited here was to run something on Anglo-Saxon versus, and that's the first one that's connected to that.
Well, I see individual versus collective also.
Yeah. There was another one there, wasn't there? And then we'll come to you.
Yeah, the willingness to have a deeper, more messy conversation
Versus?
versus polite. So how deep do we really root and expose?
Okay. And there's...
I just have a question. That example you brought with the public school.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't get it at all. I have no idea what you imply with
Okay.
it. So is it something which probably constitutes also a difference between German and English origin?
Well, for me, was me becoming aware of an unconscious prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
That was...
The public, I don't get it.
Public school is private schools.
Oh, it's
there's a...
private than public, although it's
sorry. There we go. Culture...
Posh accents.
Okay.
Oh, Posh would have done
Isn't it lovely? So without actually checking out the assumptions, you would have been left there not knowing what on earth I was talking about. Yeah. So yes, it's a particularly often old schools, been around for hundreds of years, which are fee-paying,
yeah, right.
which often actually are schools where lots of people who end up in government and in powerful positions go. Or as John's just gone, they tend to be able to then look down on the rest of us who go to state schools. Okay? Yeah. So that's the story. Yeah. Is that clearer? This is really important. This is a cultural difference at play. Unless we get it out, you're left going, what on earth is he on about? Yeah. Anything else? Yes?
I would like to expand that a little more to origins and evolution and differences. Fundamentals are really important.
Okay. So here's my suggestion. What I'd like you to do is look at the similarities and differences between them. And if you want to keep it really simple, this is how I suggest you do it. List them. How are they the same and different? At the end of it, and I'll give you a bit of a heads up, I'd like you to see if you can work out which is the difference that makes a difference. It might actually be a similarity that is the most important, actually. It may not be something that's different between them. You go, the similarity between these two things is the most important. Okay? So it might not just be about a difference. Clear enough? So, here comes the messy bit. My request is, those of you who've come up with something, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 2 more flip charts. Go and grab one and actually write up what you're doing, and the rest of you move where your energy takes you. And have a conversation and spend some time getting out the similarities and differences. Willing? Go.
Yeah. I think we could have gone more. The questions we didn't touch them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Messy.
Yeah.
That is messy.
Yeah.
Even though I think messiness and it.
Okay. Can I just have your attention briefly? I want you to stay in your groups. I'm going to explain to you the next stage. Recap. You've just been doing the what. What are the similarities and differences between two different things? The next thing I want you to do is to look at the intended and unintended consequences if you pay attention to a particular difference that makes a difference. And I'm going to use the lovely example of Brexit. So in the UK, we went through in the last 2 years, 3 years, a massive national conversation about how the UK is the same or different to Europe. And there's lots of things the same and lots of things that's different. And what seems to have won out is we're not Europe, we're an island. There's some big differences around how people in the UK want to be governed, not by the Central European government, and there's some differences around language. So we've amplified our difference, particularly around how we're governed, and we are voted out. But there have been some unintended consequences. So, an unintended consequence of Brexit that we could be facing is in 2 years' time we can't fly to Europe. We may not be able to fly to Europe. There's a conversation in the UK at the moment that Brexit might mean that if there's not agreement, we can't fly to Europe. So really sorry, we won't be able to come and get sausages in Munich. Okay? There will be other unintended consequences. We've already had the unintended consequence of the euro-pound exchange rate affecting people's ability to go on holiday. We've had other unintended consequences in terms of people who live in Europe, who are English, who have retired, faced with possibly not being able to have healthcare where they're living. I don't think that was necessarily something they were aware of. So I'd like you now to go into another inquiry, picking something that you think is particularly significant as you compare similarities and differences, and ask yourself, if we were to pay attention to that and to really work at it, what might be the intended or the unintended consequences of us doing that? Does that make sense? No? There's a no there. John?
Yeah, I'm slow, but I'm trainable, okay?
Okay.
So we're working on academic and street smarts.
Yep.
So it seems like we have to come up with something about which there are like some unintended consequences of what? Of either doing.
So what's one of the most significant similarities and differences you've got there?
Well, the difference that makes a difference is that street smarts are oriented more on working with real needs of real people.
Okay.
But that was when we decided was the difference that made a difference.
So if you were to spend a lot of energy working on real people on real issues.
If we overfocus, so it's like polarity management. What's
Yes.
the downside and the upside?
Yes. If you over-egg it, if you focused on it too much, what might be the intended consequences, the things you hope for, but if you overdo it, what might be the unintended consequences? Okay? Got it? So, another round of inquiry, 10-15 minutes, then we'll come back and hear from you.
You know, because it's, in English it's different. In German it's more easy. In English, doing a guided imagery would be hard for me. But you
That's not good. I don't know the guided meditation. I've never done that.
What would be something you would?
Okay. So, what would be good is if we could just hear from some of the groups a couple of examples of intended and unintended consequences when you focus on a difference that makes a difference.
The advantage that they are well accepted, they are fast, they are much more easy, and they are much more controllable. And it fits our conditioning, especially here in the Western world and in Germany. The downside, if you're all about the rational side, is of course that you maybe can miss the point because you're not talking about that which is really essential. You lose out on relationships. So you're just in a meta position, but you're not connecting. And you're detaching from reality at times. And then on the emotional side, emotional approaches and working with emotions, on the upside of it, it's more real, it's more authentic. You make the implicit explicit, but you also need a good facilitator to hold that. Because otherwise, if you do too much of it, it can get very messy and it can get out of control. And then you might get stuck in the emotions and in the processing of the emotions, and you can't get anything done anymore. So you also miss the point. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, one more.
So we had a conversation around messy versus polite. And we kind of quickly said that there's actually probably two types of messy. One is the more sensitive and difficult kind of conversation, and the other one is the maybe less structured one. And in our conversation, those two actually more or less came together again. Where we said, okay, the biggest difference that we see between Anglo-Saxon and German is that in the Anglo-Saxon world, in the US, people tend to build on each other, and you build and you try and you fail and you learn, and that's actually how you grow and further develop. Where our feeling that was in Germany, it's often you don't fail. It needs to be perfect, it needs to be further perfect. There's more reductionist of risks, and then we work that as, okay, if we want to solve that and that gap, and if we want to address it, what would we do? We quickly agreed that probably the middle grey part, in the sense of let's cut it to the middle, was actually a total kind of loss and grey zone. You don't get the innovations anymore, and it's not perfect anymore. So the better solution would be to try to get best of both worlds. Of course, then the work is how do we explain that to people in a good way that they actually understand each other. And an unintended consequence would be that people don't really then kind of recognize themselves anymore and their cultures, and there's quite some work that needs to happen there. The other unintended consequence would be if you really take it to the macro, if everybody would do that, then in the same time we all still end up doing the same thing around the globe. Because if we actually find how this works, then we as OD may be out of business, but in the end, you know, you still miss the richness. And I think that was also a last mentioned unintended consequence, that if you really do that kind of understanding each other, not only horizontal but also kind of vertical, then you also really find the value from both worlds if you do it in a good way.
Lovely, thank you. Oh.
The group is forcing me to.
Let's just do it.
Thank you very much. What we looked at was evolution, origins and evolution of OD, and both Anglo-Saxon. What we tried to divide as Anglo, in a US way and UK way. But more importantly, I'll just give you the unexplained or unexpected consequences. And we said the drivers of this are a little bit unusual. And that is, we're very happy that Brexit has happened, because it's united Europe, and especially other organizations, to come together as never before, to really go into political union and economic and educational collaboration as never before. So OD will play a pretty important role here in trying to steer it in this direction for greater collaboration and greater, shall we say, cross-silo, cross-country coordination. We'd like to thank Mr. Trump, because he's brought Europe together as never before in terms of aligning the kind of not just military and security issues, but in fact the greater confidence that Europe can go do what they want. And we'd like to thank Silicon Valley for also forcing a discussion around values, which is, I think, the OD kind of change, if you like, to what are the values that OD is trying to purport and also to push in an organization. So we're saying that OD has been behind the curve, and now in fact it can be part of the greater change. We're saying that OD must begin to change its name a little bit. That was one of the recommendations. And certainly change its mindset to see not as an organization, but as an ecosystem. So broaden this understanding, just like with the broader sense of Europe. And we also said that it would have to be more proactive rather than reactive. And for various reasons, we are optimistic about OD in the German context, not so much in the American context. As you know, business schools like Harvard and so on have been criticized, the business school, for supporting a certain type of system which has led to this crisis. It could be moral, it could be whatever you like. So we're happy that all of these things are forcing Germany back into the limelight in a very positive way.
Thank you. So, because of time, and if we can hold some of the others, and I trust you'll share your thinking, but I'm really struck by what you say there. You know, what you've just described is unintended consequences that ripple at a wider system level, at a societal, political level, at a national level, that we're into the fields of practice, and then we're into our individual practice. Because the next thing I'd like you to do is all come to the front, please, and just gather round the front and stand, because the bit after me, which I'll be handing over to Frida afterwards. So if you just all come to the front. And then I can drop this microphone.
You can use this one, maybe?
So, because the final part is if we've worked out some of the intended and unintended consequences, then now what? Now, what are the implications of this? At an individual level, for me, for I as a practitioner, what's the implications if I am a German practitioner working with UK people who've just voted to leave Europe? Does anything happen at a relational level there? What are the implications for you as a community of practice and as a community of practitioners as INOC? How does it unfold there? And at a wider system level, what are the implications for us for clients? So one of the reasons that Gifford and the fellow board directors and the people, those of us who are working on the conference, which I'm co-chair next year, why we chose a theme of relevance is because our concern with organisational development is too often we become too preoccupied with our own practice and with ourselves, and we can sound very elitist and very disconnected from the outside world. So what is, therefore, the implications of everything you've been talking about and the relevance to your clients? Because if we don't connect it to them, what are we here for? What are we here for? So my question is to you, and just a brief plenary conversation, what for you are the implications at any of those levels?
I think there'll never be a 100% right answer. There are many options on the table at any one time, and it's about getting people to align on what the decision is that they're going to take, understanding that you're on a spectrum all of the time. Yeah, there is no, it's not black and white.
Any others?
I think we had one discussion here regarding the client perspective. To be on the eye level or eye-to-eye interaction with your clients. So not, because usually the consultants with the time we know it a bit better, but really to be at the same level as your clients, also allow the feedback cycles with your clients, that he's going to give you feedback, how it's working and things like that. Full transparency, and this is a kind of, for me.
And I'm pleased you said that, because what we miss when we're at an event like this, at a conference, if we keep it at the theoretical and intellectual level and we don't own the me, that it's my opinion, it's my practice, therefore I am the person who's intervening, we run the risk of disconnecting from our clients and actually not taking responsibility for what we do. So just to make it really personal, I had an intention today to make this messy, and there were some unintended consequences that it was probably a little bit messier than I expected, and I own that. But I also trust that you are all big enough and old enough to take from this what you want. But owning it is really important. What else? And what are the implications at any of those levels? John?
I'm thinking now, after hearing all this, that it goes back to Barry Johnson's polarity model, that I need to be more aware of these various, what looks like an either or, put that and in the middle, and not give up my academic orientation, but to be standing in both worlds. And I'm thinking of the question, what is it time for now? Is it time for this, or is it time, like when is it time for, rather than getting positional, I would say that one of the messages for us as a profession is to not get positional, because then that excludes the upsides of the thing we're not in favor of, but to find some kind of rhythm back and forth.
John, I have the same thought around polarities, because I was thinking about the story between the Germans and Italians this morning. So messy and structured. Bernhard was talking about creating safety, but the need to take risk. And I think for me that's the thing that's come all the way through all these conversations, is there's a polarity, there's always opposites. And particularly when we're working interculturally, it's how do we manage those, how do we create a both and for people?
We had an interesting conversation as well around the fact that more organizations work more internationally, and therefore kind of some of these dynamic conflicts tend to happen more. At the same time, what we see both in German and Anglo-Saxon cultures is that everything needs to be quicker, everything needs to be kind of faster, we can't travel anymore. I think the question that we had on our table is how do we deal with that as professionals? Because we need to deliver even more important interventions with even less time and virtual. And I think that is something that we need to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
All these discussions help me already now, the first part of this conference, to be more can you say that? Geerdet? Grounded.
Oh, grounded.
Grounded.
Lovely.
Grounded.
Yeah.
To help to find myself, to be more, how do I say, that I can react to the needs of the clients, as well to my own needs, as well to all the environmental needs, to be more part of all happenings. And if you're grounded, or if you stand more, like John said, on both feet, then I think it's easier for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, dealing with ambiguity is a fact of life these days. VUCA, we were mentioning that word. It's a fact of life. How are we going to deal with it? Get ourselves grounded first of all, before we can, go out
assume to help others. But, bottom line, deal with ambiguity. And what's a Chinese proverb with the reed that bends and doesn't break?
Yeah. And so I guess there's two things, because we're going to close now. There's two things that strike me. One, this is my bias. For me, the real work in my practice is dealing with mess. My own mess, with your mess, with the organisation's mess. And if I'm not comfortable with that, how on earth can I be of service?
Yeah.
How on earth can I be of service? The other thing that strikes me, there's a book called, I think it's The Management Myth, and I can't remember the name of the author, but he writes in it something along the lines of all business schools, and arguably the institute I work for, are offering clients the idea that there is a book or a model or a lens or a tool that offers the answer. Mm-hmm. And that is inherently an absurdity. Because as a profession, management education is 60 years old, 70 years old. And he makes the lovely observation that we have far more to learn about organisations and human systems and our experiences of them from the fields of creativity and philosophy, which have hundreds of years of thinking and practice behind them, and are profoundly more human and connected to my experience and your experience than probably most of the texts that many of these seats of learning would offer. So yes, I leave you with that final thought, creativity and philosophy. And thank you for your patience and your willingness to play.